the 10th day of 2023, August. I'm going to be your host. I had a little problem getting the stream to go live that time. My apologies. I'm Dana Durnford at the Nuclear Proctologist.org, and you can call in or text at 709-589-4406. 709-589-4406. And let's get after it, I guess. Seems it's a bit of a struggle to get a connection. Remember last night I was having issues. Hi everybody. We got a poll for everybody tonight. Does the nuclear industry's endless, relentless hatred of humans and the species worldwide constitute a death cult? Excuse me. It's very easy to quantify that particular assertion. And so you notice over here it's lower than recommended. That was just because I was on this screen. But last night it was, the backup was at a sync, so I had to redo everything, the whole stream keys and everything that time just to get live, but we are live. That's all that matters. And boy, do we got a show tonight for everybody, my goodness. Just going to double check and make sure the stream is streaming good. Hi, everybody. Thank you, Dana. 709-589-4406 for anybody who wants to call in. Basically, just Canadian and American calls. I got too many expenses to be taking long-distance calls for another week or so. Until we get the truck fixed, right? I just can't afford to go into debt anymore. Okay, so the stream is good, everybody. Let me double check here. Hi, everybody. We're almost ready to get running here. I'm looking to make sure my stream is good. Looks like everybody seems to be okay. It should be in a 1080 stream. Let's just go ahead and do it. I just clean my glasses and away we go. I'll keep an eye on the comments section. Now, Sue was asking, would DCA help with an 8-year-old child's autism? So DCA is a mineral. It's like vitamins. It's no different, except it's not widely known. And it has some unique properties. It's completely harmless, by the way. And what it really does is unplates your blood, or another way of looking at it is allows your blood system to maximize carrying nutrition and oxygen throughout your body. And it ain't gonna hurt, that's for sure. And Sue, there was a diet for children with autism that had some pretty good success rates, like a 30 to 40% success rate. And it was just eliminating starch and sugar from the child's diet. It was created by a doctor who wrote a book about it. It's called a keto diet. Keto diet. All it really is getting rid of sugar from the diet, like fine pop. But don't use like artificial sugars like aspartame. So go, find, and there are drinks out there that don't have sugar and are not substituting it. Well, I've never heard of any side effects from it, Angel's Place. It's just a mineral like vitamins. I'm pretty sure some people are allergic to vitamins, I suppose. But I've been covering this a long time. I've never known any adverse side effects to it whatsoever. And I've read a stupid amount of literature on it. Now, if you're taking all kinds of other medications or substitutes and stuff like that, for people out there, they will cause you adverse side effects on their own, right? But DCA is a mineral. It can't harm you. How can a mineral harm you? And you're only taking it in small quantities, right? And let's get on with it. Japan to start Fukushima water release within weeks. Yeah, that side effect you're talking about, I'm familiar with that. That was propaganda from the nuclear industry, or from the medical industry. They didn't want people looking at cures. It's a mineral. It's like vitamins. How can a vitamin or a mineral have adverse side effects? And the industry, the sites that were sprouting that kind of nonsense, didn't have anybody's name on it. They didn't have any authors. It wasn't traced back to anybody. It was just these random sites. You put out that information and abandoned the site. I've been covering it for well over a decade. Release and you can walk into any pharmacy and buy it, right? You can't do that if it had any adverse side effects. Release of contaminated water from the damaged nuclear plant. And any pharmacist can make it, any compound pharmacist can make it on the spot. It's just a mineral. Release of the contaminated water from the damaged nuclear plant has been criticized by fishers and countries in the region. They haven't stopped releasing the water. I'm going to disagree with you, Angel Place. I'm disagreeing with you 100%. DCA is just a mineral. It can't have side effects. Unless you're taking like a big cupful of it every day. And that goes true with any mineral. If you take too much of it, but it's so expensive, I doubt that was an issue. When you can walk into any pharmacist and get it over the counter, there's a reason. It's because it's just a mineral, see? But you can't get it naturally. You have to go to a pharmacist to extract it for you. So they're saying they're going to start dumping the water. Does it look like they're dumping water? Well, I just think you're mistaken, Angel's Place. I've used it myself, and I know a lot of people have used it. But ultimately, it comes back to you can walk in any pharmacist and get it. There is no warning labels on it. There's no. This was the information that you're talking about. There's only one place you got that, and that was from the propaganda, the medical propaganda machine on the internet. Your doctors never gave you that diagnosis that DCA hurt you, right? Japan's plan to start again, it's just a mineral. Japan's plan to start releasing treated. You can always call in, 709-589-4406. Into the ocean as soon, and again, think about the way they're framing that narrative as late August, citing unnamed sources. So, again, whenever you see this citing unnamed sources, it's a big red warning flag because the subject the science is really clear on this kind of emissions from nuclear power plants. If you can get past the propaganda machine, which dominates the search engines, of course. The release is likely to come shortly after the Prime Minister Kishida meets U.S. President Joe Biden, South Korean President next week in the U.S. of A. No worries, Angels. I was just saying you have an option, that's all, if it worked for you. Japan's nuclear regulator last month granted approval for plant operators. Like DCA, all it's doing is unplating your blood. It's just a mineral. All right, and there's lots of stuff out there you can take to boost your blood, right? And DCA is one of them. But it has a unique property that was studied, and the studies were it reduced all hard tumors by 70%. Now, I was taking half a gram twice a day. That was my dose. And I would have to take a bottle a day for have side effects. But what you do is, because it does build up in your body, you're only supposed to take it 4 or 5 days and take 2 days off, because you haven't used up everything that's in your body, so you're saving money, right? Your body it does the same thing for vitamins too, where it can't use up a lot of vitamins. It can only use up what the homeostasis lets you replenish. Granted approval, so Japan's nuclear regulator granted approval last month. They don't have the authority to poison the ocean, and on top of that, the reactors were gone 12 years ago. So the claim that they're going to start releasing it, when that's all they've been doing for all these years. It's very worrisome when you see that kind of propaganda. Granted approval for the plant's operator to start releasing, which Japan International Atomic Energy Agency says is safe. Well, first off, the International Atomic Energy Agency is not a regulatory agency. They don't have the authority. They're not. They don't have sovereignty over any country to implement penalties or anything like this. And they're part of the military-industrial complex known as the United Nations, which is one of the worst, well, probably the worst organization we've seen in history, and has made the world complacent, thinking we're united, when they're the complete opposite. United in evil is the only way you would describe UN. To release the water, UN nuclear watchdog doesn't have the authority to approve anything. But 1.3 million tons of water, that's the cover story. So they're claiming nothing got out. What got out is in the tanks. And they've been refining this story for 12 years, or I guess 10 years. But 2 years after it, in 2013, I guess is the best way to put it, they had 1,000 tanks. In 2023, they have 1,000 tanks. So they built no tanks, and you can fill up all the tanks if the reactor normal operating, where it uses 4,500 tons a minute, 1 million gallons a minute. Stored in huge tanks, has been filtered. You can't filter it because the filter, you can have a chain reaction from the neutrons, the gammas, the alphas, the betas in the filter immediately would cause a chain reaction because you can't contain it. You can't borate the filter. I'm talking about particulates, so they're going to be landing on top of each other. And recently, about a week and a half ago, there was a story claiming that the filters had different clots that would separate different isotopes, but it doesn't work that way. And so if you put 200 million atoms on the head of a needle, And say 100,000 of them are cesium, 100,000 of them are strontium, the rest are curium, which is, by the way, the biggest byproduct of the fuel rods. How do you filter out different size atoms? You can't, right? You can't filter that out. Everything has to be contained, and you can't contain this because it's a lot of that particulates is fuel, and it's still splitting the atoms. So if you put it all in a tank, it sinks, settles to the tank, a lot of it, and then it starts a chain reaction. And remember, it's still splitting the atoms. So whether it's in the actual fuel rod or the particulates, and you're spraying it all over the reactor cores, if you were sucking that up and putting it in tanks, by the way, you couldn't step over the hoses. That's a lethal dose to walk past them, let alone step over them. All these particulates are in your tanks. The water's going to boil in the tanks because you're talking about, this is how much energy we're talking about. And this doesn't go away for, once it's released in this capacity. Through TEPCO's Advanced Liquid Processing System, the ALPS, which didn't work in 2014. Do you get what's going on here? Because you can fill up the tank 6 times a day with a single reactor. The reactors, again, let me show you the pictures, because it seems incredible. Fukushima Reactor 3 and Fukushima Reactor 4, these reactors don't exist anymore. This is just the stumps, the very stumps of the reactors, right? You can't treat something, by the way, that don't exist anymore. Too bad you can't treat Arnie Gunnarsson and his disgusting wife, Maggot Gunnarsson. She was a public relation officer for the nuclear industry for 2 decades. The treated water, which is complete lie to treat it. Japanese officials object to the use of the word contaminated. Object to the use of the word contaminated. And talking about tritium, before being released from buildings that don't exist anymore, becomes contaminated when it's used to cool the fuel rods that have melted. It's really junk science, isn't it? Used to cool the fuel rods that have melted. And discharging water is expected to take 30 to 40 years. Again, you couldn't decommission a normal reactor in 40 years. How are you going to decommission multiple melter reactors and 8 fuel pools that detonated? China denounced the plan as extremely irresponsible. China knows better. China's not stupid. China's not naive. China's not gullible. China knows the reactor looks like this. South Korea knows the reactor looks like that. Taiwan knows the reactor looks like that. International Atomic Energy Agency knows the reactor looks like that. They're working to destroy your future. This is what we're going to poll tonight, by the way. Does the nuclear industry's endless hatred of humans and species worldwide constitute a death cult? Well, yeah, Dana, that's a death cult. Hong Kong threatened to ban the food from the 10 prefectures if the water is released, but Hong Kong knows the reactor looks like that. So you got China, Taiwan, and South Korea working together with Japan to hoodwink the entire Asian community. Because this whole narrative that we've seen show up on July the 10th onwards, well, like it showed up by July the 3rd, but by July the 10th, we started seeing this narrative that there's 2.2 grams of tritium is all that got out of the buildings. Don't worry, because they're all in the tanks, which is, it's an absurd suggestion. As planned, right? To release the water as planned, but it never stopped releasing it. And that's just 2 of the reactors. Remember, there's 4 of them. There was 2 fuel pools at the top of each building that don't exist anymore that had at least 6 reactor cores in each one of them. Back in the water, Fukushima's no-go zone gets first surf shop since the disaster. There was a time when Shinji thought he would never surf again along the coast where he grew up. Well, why would, and like they're showing this picture of young, healthy people. I pray they're not swimming in the nuclear wasteland that is Japan's ocean. My goodness. But that's what the picture is suggesting, right? EU, Norway, Iceland lift post-Fukushima curbs on Japanese food. So the EU is the 15th? Norway and EU supposed to lift it on the 15th, and Norway and Iceland announced just last week or something announced they were going to release the restrictions. But the restrictions are not restrictions. The food that they're shipping into EU, Norway, and Iceland have to have a certificate from the degenerate Japanese government. So Angel's place says she had 2 tumors, they're gone, it worked, the DCA, but they got a side effect, which was the company does document. Well, there's not just one company worldwide that makes DCA, it's made at every pharmacy on the planet. So I'd be very careful thinking that. And congratulations, by the way, that the tumors were removed. But you can't possibly suggest 100% that just because that company made that statement, that every company is making the same statement, because they're not. That's the only company that's your so-called company. All I've seen that is on the propaganda websites that were created strictly to attack DCA. Like, it was so effective. It was also used on all kinds of experimental diseases, and I can drag up the information, but I'm not going to. But I think you're going too far with it right now. And I'll suggest people ignore what you're saying, because I don't believe what you're saying is true. I think you're misled. And I don't want people to turn away from it just because the propaganda machine managed to get to some people. The European Union, Norway, and Iceland on Thursday lifted import restrictions they imposed on food products from parts of Japan after the Fukushima nuclear disaster. On parts of Japan, food should be banned from the entire country. So again, we see, now we covered that extensively. Japan's cuisine ingredients is shown at exhibition in China. What else is new? Japanese eateries in China fear ruin as Fukushima water discharge looms. Japanese eateries in China. So again, what they're claiming, right, when you see that narrative, they're claiming nothing got out. Kishida, to bring up water, released misinformation at a 3-way summit. Going to use his meetings with Joe Biden, with crazy Joe Biden, which is the American current president, and the South Korean president who denied the reactors melted down. And like, how many prime ministers does Japan have in a decade? 10, 12 or something? They're never there very long, and then they have to get a new one because they're so corrupt. China's measures run counter to tenets of free trade. Has continued to tighten import restrictions on marine products from Japan. This is an unreasonable measure lacking scientific basis. The Japanese government must strongly urge Beijing to withdraw the restrictions. The customs authorities of China have reportedly begun inspecting all marine products imported from Japan for radioactive materials since early July. The Customs Authority of China. Look, does anybody really think China doesn't know what the reactors look like? Does anybody really think for one fucking second that China doesn't know there was at least 30 million one-ton bags? Is there anybody on the planet that's fucking stupid that they don't understand that? Is there anybody actually out there so stupid they think the fuel pools are at the top of a building that don't exist? Does anybody think somebody in Taiwan, in China, in the nuclear industry, in South Korea don't fucking know what that looks like? Because that's what they're telling you. And here's the official picture. That's the official picture there, but here's the official picture that they're currently claiming it looks like. But it can't look like something. It's a nuclear meltdown. You can't fucking change it. I apologize for getting upset. But it bothers me that we're 4 weeks into this story. My apology. 4 weeks into this story, and they're acting like that didn't happen. That blows my mind. It literally blows my mind to suggest that didn't happen. Suspending food imports from 10 prefectures, including Fukushima. Why would you suspend it from just 10 prefectures when you got a nuclear meltdown covered the entire country? There's zero possibility that the nuclear industry in South Korea, Taiwan, and fucking China don't know that happened. It's zero. It's zilch. There's no possibility whatsoever. And for them all to come out and go down that narrative that it's only tritium that will come out of the tanks and that everything is in the tanks when the buildings have been gone for 12 years, it's a very worrisome thing. It's so dishonest, I don't even have a word for it. Malfeasance don't do it credit. Opponents in Japan, South Korea urged to suspend Fukushima radioactive wastewater discharge. So they got all these protesters for something that's been going on nonstop from day one. Right? This is day one. These reactors disappeared immediately. Everybody in the nuclear industry worldwide knows that. There's nobody out there that doesn't, in the nuclear industry, that doesn't know that that's gone, that they are a complete loss. There's nobody. Reactor 3 to your right, this picture is well known. There's nothing left. There is no 9-story building anymore, or 190-foot building, 165-meter building anymore. The fuel pools are at the top of the building. The building doesn't have a top. But the official story was cooked up, no doubt, by the International Atomic Energy and the lunatic nuclear industry, which obviously is trying to exterminate all the species for the last 80 years and is succeeding, and now is going for the massive kill switch to justify the endless emissions. Does the nuclear industry's endless hatred of humans and species worldwide constitute a death cult? Yeah, Dana. We got 100%, 27 votes. Global sea surface temperatures hit a new record at unusual time of the year. You're not even like the ocean's not supposed to heat up until almost the end of summer. Not a month before summer starts. And I was going to do a die-off video tonight. And this show was the show I was going to do on Monday. But I didn't do a show Monday night. I was burnt out like I am today. Today I'm so burnt out, I never left the house. What I sat there and done was went through the last 2 months of my stories that I covered, and I'm looking for everything about that tritium, and gone back through that archive of every show for the last 2 months, and I gotta go through every screen capture, trying to figure out where did the story start, who started it originally, and who repeated it, and which academics came out in support of it and stuff like that. I was so burnt out today, I knew it was best just to take today off. I'll get back busy tomorrow. It was raining and miserable today anyway, and it was cool. The summer starts again. I'm not sure if it's tomorrow or the next day we're on to. The temperature is going to go back up into the 30s, Celsius temperatures. So back up to 80, 90, 100 degree temperatures. The average daily global sea surface temperatures hit a new record, surpassed the 2016 high. This is caused by the endless emissions from Japan into the biosphere and the oceans. Ocean plays a key role in regulating the weather patterns as they absorb heat. No, the temperature, like we're on to, the temperature was the same all year long once you got a couple of feet under the water. It never changed for millions and millions of years. But since Fukushima, it's changed. It's the same thing for the Pacific. It's been a steady temperature for millions of years. Winter and summer, it's always the same temperature. Once you get 2 feet under the surface, once you get below the freshwater delusion at the surface, got a tendency to float at the surface for quite a while before it mixes into the rest of the ocean. But we killed the phytoplankton, the bases of the food chain, the bases of the oxygen chain, the bases of the carbon sequestering chain. And that was the reason the ocean heated up. In fact, last month, there was a story here on the East Coast where the temperatures have broke all records and then some. They said after a week of summer, the ocean heated up extreme. But it can't do that in 1 week. It just can't do that. Doesn't work that way. And we were out doing research expeditions in May on the boat, and that has a ocean thermometer on the screen. And we were showing extraordinary temperatures in May. They control the narrative so well, they just make it up whenever they feel like it. Oceans play a key role in regulating weather patterns as they absorb heat. It doesn't work that way. So then they're going to blame the ocean and produces half the plant's oxygen. Not anymore, it doesn't. As the ocean heats up, the warmer water will be less able to absorb carbon dioxide. No, the phytoplankton are gone. That's why it's not absorbing that. Leaving the gas in the atmosphere and contributing to hotter temperatures. Again, this is junk. This is garbage can diagnosis stuff. Warmer marine waters also force sea life to move in search of cooler water. Again, this is craziness to talk like that. Like, we got 46 million birds that didn't show up to lay their eggs in the migratory spots where they've been a million generations have came here to raise their young, and they didn't show up. And they didn't show up somewhere else because you know what? If 46 million birds migratory seabirds show up somewhere else, you're going to fucking notice it. And nobody's noticed it. So they were exterminated. And we know this is like 3 years ago because that's how long we've been doing the research on this, on the Atlantic Ocean side. It's 6 years of research expeditions, 4 to 5 months a year in the Pacific Ocean. Impacting food chain and fish stocks, and it can cause predatory marine life like sharks to act more aggressive as they struggle in hotter temperatures. Now, they're more aggressive when they can't find their food because they're the apex predators. And nothing escapes Fukushima pulse event and 80 years of emissions from the hateful, despicable, disgusting nuclear industry, which is really something. When you look at how much they control in every country, the nuclear industry, they control your media, your universities, key positions in your government. And they've been doing this since the 40s and 50s because of this secrecy right behind the nuclear industry, nuclear weapons. Remember the secrecy, the 10,000 spies spying, or well, it's more than that, but just say 10,000 spying on Manhattan scientists and that. There was another 10,000 spying on the spies, and probably another 10,000 spying on those spies. That's how secretive the whole thing was. And that industry never went away. It proliferated. Their children got the jobs, and their children got the jobs, and their children, same as the nuclear industry, got the jobs. And the current generation have mongrelized any concept of reality. It is the timing of this new record that has alarmed researchers and scientists. These are not researchers and these are not scientists when they're making false claims, folks. Scientists are looking to the factors contributing to the surge in the temperature in the ocean. Think about that statement. Yet they made all those assertions just before that, right? Academics, scientists, and physicists have the credibility of a rattlesnake. To this surge in temperature in the ocean, you know they're going to bite you the first chance they get, right? But say that the climate change is the leading cause at sea, absorbs most of the heat from greenhouse gases. So think of the nuclear industry. Think of every nuclear power plant. Fuel pool is hemorrhaging radiation, creates plumes that covers the entire planet after the first. If they just release one plume in a 24-hour period, that's basically what the models should be. But what you're seeing is a model of 27 days where it covers the entire planet. It never stops coming out. That's why it does that. So think of a snowstorm. After 20 days, 27 days in this instance, covers the entire planet with snow, and the snow never melts, and it snows all day, all night. So now pretend the snow is not snow but radiation, and now you get what's going on. The radiation never goes away, and it never stops coming out. And you have 1,000 fuel pools, hemorrhaging plumes, massive plumes. Each fuel pool is full of about 5 or 6 reactor cores that are splitting atoms. The same as they would, each reactor core would power 1 million homes. So you have 5 million homes worth of fuel pulsing, splitting atoms into the environment with no containment. And so Fukushima was a pulse event where you lost the entire inventories. You ejected it out of the buildings and into the environment in its raw form, where it's still splitting atoms. So the particulates are still releasing atoms. And these numbers were in the trillions per square meter and a kilogram in Tokyo, for instance, of becquerels, atomic decays per second, because it had those particular attributes. A scientist is somebody everybody eventually will try to spit in their face. That's what a scientist now is. They're the worst things that human ever had. That's the legacy now. A scientist is somebody you can't possibly trust under any circumstances, because the nuclear industry has made sure you can't trust them. Japan's January-June farm exports hit a record, and then they put in COVID impact to drive you away. which is the cover story for Radiation Fallout, by the way, for the illnesses, the 1800 diseases and illnesses, not immune deficiencies and injuries. So Japan's farm exports hit a record, but Japan's consumption is the lowest ever. So they can't sell it to their own because there's so much diseases and cancers and everything. So they're just shipping it to your countries. And if you don't want it in your country and you have some morally compass-driven people in positions to stop it, they'll get them replaced with the pro-nuclear, and they'll remove the restrictions like they've been doing now for 12 years. The Titan measures came ahead of the release of treated water with low concentrations of tritium. So again, right, they're claiming it's just tritium. And once again, remember, the buildings are gone. The fuel pools and reactor cores at the top of the building are gone. They were gone by day 5, by the 16th of March, 2011. It's not a game. 9 countries and regions still impose import restrictions on food from parts of Japan. Japan has set its target of raising annual agricultural food exports 2 trillion yen by 2025 and 5 trillion yen by 2030. Crazy, right? So the idea is to slaughter you everywhere in your supermarkets. And this is why the majority of nuclear power plants are surrounded by farms. The world is crazy. When you actually look at the nuclear industry and the world hasn't worked out what's going on, that's why I say the world is crazy, right? So the question is, why is almost every single nuclear power plant, except for a couple worldwide, surrounded by farms? And the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation into the environment. Now they know that the plants and the fruits and everything else is going to suck up radiation. They got tons of studies on it. So then the question is, why is almost every single nuclear power plant surrounded by farms? Nuclear radiation is the most carcinogenic thing that exists, so why would it be surrounded by farms? Why would you have it in your fresh water supplies? Lake Huron in Canada, one of the third biggest body of fresh water on the entire planet, of aquifer, drinkable water, is surrounded by nuclear power plants both in Canada and the United States on that coastline or ocean or lake lines. Irreversible heart damage for children of 50 becquerels a kilogram. So why would you have farms surrounding a nuclear power plant where the fuel pools are hemorrhaging radiation 24 hours a day? So 14 prefectures in Japan were banned by 55 countries, thank goodness, for a decade, not Canada, because Canada's not really a country, obviously, for 10 years. You can see in the picture to the right, that's from the mainstream media in Japan, actually grown food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. Growing food right alongside of 1-ton bags of radiation. It's beyond evil if you actually understand how much radiation hemorrhages from a nuclear power plant fuel pools, multiple fuel pools at the top of each reactor building, is hemorrhaging. And that's not even the best word. I fail to have a proper word to articulate how much we're talking about. But I'm trying to give you an example in the artificial radioactive fallout I have a depiction on your screen. If you could see it, that's what you would see in the farmland. Translocation of radiation in wheat. So why are you growing food right next door to these disease factories? By the way, cesium, gamma, immediately, all gamma, not just cesium, immediately damages the heart muscle. And all gamma, by the way, goes into the thyroid gland. And for children, that means they're mutating, they're having mutated hormones, radioactive hormones too, and then it ends up in their bones, and you have mutated stem cells. So why are nuclear power plants surrounded by farms when they know that all plants and trees and everything else is going to suck up the radiation? Endless studies showing it, because it's a death cult. It's unequivocally a death cult. There's no other way to look at it. And there's 1,800 diseases, not just cancer. Experimentally determined translocations 134 cesium in potatoes. And how many people eat the potatoes, you know? And what do kids love? French fries. What is McDonald's using for French fries? Which is hopefully it was potatoes, but I don't know anymore with McDonald's. An estimation of the half-life periods of cesium content in root inhabited soil layers of meadow ecosystems. I showed you the other studies where it sucks it up into the plant anyway. So does anybody really think it was an accident that almost every nuclear power plant is surrounded by farms? Does the nuclear industry's endless hatred of humans and the species worldwide constitute a death cult? Yeah, Dana. Yeah. UN nuclear watchdog finds no explosive Zaporizhzhia plant, despite the fact that they spent almost a year screaming there was explosives at the plant. Right? They had everybody on the planet shitbagged. There's going to be a nuclear event. If they get chased out of it, they're going to set off the explosives and have the meltdown. I've heard this said to me probably over 1,000 times in the last year. And now they got to come out and say there's none there. It just boggles the mind. UN shouldn't exist, by the way. This is a military-industrial complex. You have about 195 militaries. Imagine if the Bloods and the Crips absorbed 195 gangs. You get that's what we're talking about. That's all they are. They're a gang of monsters. That's what UN actually is. Not even a big gang of monsters and sadistic demons. Decommissioning work halted at old nuclear facility in Whiteshell. Deficiencies were found in emergency preparedness, inadequate oversight and training, poor decision making. It just summed up the nuclear industry. Bravo, bravo. Work had to be halted to decommission a former nuclear disease factory after an internal review concluded that the emergency protocol at Whiteshell's site were deficient for years. Guess who's in charge of all of this? Operation at the former Whiteshell Laboratories in Pinawa, 110 kilometers southeast of Winnipeg, Canada. Canada is literally the worst nuclear industry we got. Like, if we had the same meltdowns Japan had in China, you wouldn't be allowed to buy anything only Fukushima food. Or in Japan, you wouldn't be allowed to buy anything only the food from the nuclear wasteland in their supermarkets. Canada would ban all other foods. No, you got to eat the radioactive food. Farmers got to make a living. That's what Japan said, by the way. Joe McBurdy. We've covered him so many times. There's nobody I know on the planet in the nuclear industry that's a good person. Joe, by the way, McBurdy is the farthest thing from a good person. I personally see this as an organizational failure on the part of our leadership. We allowed this to happen. The review discovered the facilities failed to maintain fire extinguishers, emergency lighting. Well, it's the nuclear industry. What do you expect? It's the most incompetent species we've come across. They're only good at exterminating the species and humanity. They're no good at anything else. Inoperable fire hydrants. The facility failed to provide adequate training, protective equipment, personnel, the staff its firefighting. Yeah, that sounds about right. There's nuclear industry. Why is any... McBreedy addressed the findings during a June 28 hearing at the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. Canada, let me just remind you, Canada does not have a Nuclear Safety Commission. They have some people that claim they're the Nuclear Safety Commission, but the evidence clearly demonstrates these have nothing to do with safety, all to do with cover-ups. A federal regulatory body tasked with overseeing the nuclear disease factories. In other words, this is controlled opposition. Inadequate oversight from management, poor decision-making, inadequate training protocols, and ineffective organizational structure contributed to the severity of the issues. What we failed to do approximately, is make sure we had the right people and the right structures in place, says crazy. Roughly 48 firefighters were on staff at the time of the review, but many required additional levels of training. Well, like, the only thing you can do in a nuclear meltdown is run away. You can't put it out. It burns at 9,000 degree Fahrenheit temperatures. You can't contain it either. Organization set a targeted goal of 27 new firefighters. So they need 75 firefighters on standby for a nuclear disease factory. A further 120 maintenance workers, engineers, planners, supervisors have been hired to work on the site in recent years. They're trying to make a profit, so they're skimping everywhere. Because they don't care about you. They don't even care about themselves. When asked why the site had been so under-resourced, the general manager attributed to an oversight. No, that's how they make money. They can't decommission a place and spend all the money because then there's no profit. Right? Chris Singh taught us how evil they actually are. Which is Holtec. A decommissioning process involved entombing the former reactor in cement at the high level and taking the low level to Chalk River, which had 2 nuclear meltdowns in 55 and 57. 1955, 1957. The first meltdown on the planet that they admit to for a nuclear power plant was Chalk River, Canada, which is on the river that goes right to Ottawa and feeds into the aquifers for the Great Lakes. It's been hemorrhaging out. That's what they done there, right? Was they had a meltdown there. They grouted it in place recently after 60, 70 years later or something. So that's what they want to do with the laboratory reactor. It's so bad apparently they can't do anything with it, so they just want to, what they call grout, pour grout in it and just leave it entombed. But that breaks down with the Wigner effect from the neutron bombardment of the infrastructure. No matter what it is, it'll break it down and make it very, very brittle and therefore incapable of retaining its structure after 4 or 5 decades. Entombing the former reactor in concrete. Canada is literally a scum. Canada's nuclear industry is nothing but a bunch of scum. There's harsher words I would rather use, but I'm not going to because I got a bad habit when I start swearing. I blow the whole show. It's very difficult for me to rein in my contempt for this industry as it is. And transporting low-level nuclear waste to Chalk River. So they're going to put the high-level waste, pour cement over it and leave it in place. That's not going to work. And they're going to transport the low level because they have so much of it. This is up by Winnipeg, right? This is about central, a little past central Canada on the west side of it, if you're looking east to west. Before decontamination work can resume, it must complete an 8-phase restart plan and receive approval from the Non-Safety Commission. The plan includes a complete review of all operations. This is a huge site we're talking about. Additional deficiencies related to record keeping are being addressed. Wait, what? They're not keeping good records of what they're doing with all the radioactive material? So what are they doing? Shipping it off to the local landfills again? And then the piece of shit said there's no risk to the environment or public from complete incompetence. Like grouting it or cementing it into place is not an option. Why not decommission it? Why not take it apart? Why not bring in experts? Why not fly in a whole bunch of homeless from Japan and see if they can fix it? Because that's the people that work on the nuclear meltdowns, are the homeless and the destitute. So they're just going to fill it up with cement. And then how are you supposed to do anything with it in 30 or 40 years then? Hey, morons. How does that work? The world's most disgusting industry is the nuclear industry. The Nuclear Safety Commission conducts annual review of the sites but failed to identify the issues. The Nuclear Safety Commission, once a year, walks past the site. What kind of oversight is it that would allow something to deteriorate to this extent and not be aware? How good is the oversight? Well, there is no oversight. There is no checks and balances. And they went on to question whether Canadian Nuclear Laboratories was competent to manage the Whiteshell site. Yeah, Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, which is at Chalk River in Ontario, that site, everything is downhill to that river, which is just about 100 meters away from the boundaries, and it's downhill right to the river. They engineered the site specifically for that purpose. Because it was built in the 50s, where there was no rules, no regulations, everything was top secret, everything was just dumped into those rivers originally for the first couple of decades. And that's why you have so much sickness and illness all the way down to the St. Lawrence. Canadian Nuclear Laboratories directed to submit safety assessments of 5 other nuclear sites they manage in Canada to ensure they don't have similar deficiencies. Well, you know they do. Canada's not really a country. Canada's a nuclear paradise for scumbags. If you can't even ensure that the fire equipment is in order, what about the high-level radioactive waste procedures? I can't believe anybody actually asked that question. That shocks me. I still don't give me faith in humanity, but it shocked me. The whole idea how to get rid of the old reactor seems to be ill-conceived. Quick and dirty way for them to allegedly clean up the site. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission is never available for comments. Plan to bury Whiteshell nuclear reactor faces questions, but not opposition. And look what they say there, like a single dental x-ray is 100 times more radioactive than the leakage. Sadistic, demonic little demons, eh? Saying that single dental x-ray is 100 times more radioactive than leakage. Well, the radioactive leakage is physical atoms. Dental x-ray is when you turn on, you turn off. It's only on for a split seconds and it's off again, right? Radiation, we're talking about, gets in your body, sequesters in your muscles, your organs, and your bones, and it pulses energy every second. Not only that, if there's 2 of them, when they're pulsing energy almost at the speed of light, they hit each other, they don't mingle, they change direction. They do that every second for millions of years, which means you're getting an x-ray every second. It's so dishonest to suggest that a dental X-ray had some attributes to radioactive emissions from a nuclear site. It's hideously, unforgivably, monstrously evil. At the radioactive dose of someone's subsistence farming or harvesting fish, wildlife, and berries downstream of the entombed reactor for a year. And that was Brian Wilcox, Director of Project Delivery for Canadian Nuclear Laboratories in Chalk River. So it must be really bad when you're rolling out Wilcox, the notorious pump nuclear crank for the nuclear industry. And there he's saying the dosage amounts to 1/10,000 the legal allowable limits. I suppose, my God. They're not corrupted because they're pure evil. They don't have to be corrupted. They're just naturally evil. And this is what it looks like after. Wow. So you're going to go from there to here. And that'll break down in no time at all. You can't see it. So then when the water penetrates it in the winter, minus 30, minus 40 there in central Canada, right? And then the water gets down there, it'll split that wide open. That'll be hemorrhaging into the environment for 1 million years. It submitted an environmental impact statement to the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. They literally, it's hard to comprehend how evil these people actually are, unless you're doing it all the time like we are. If you're not familiar with the subject. I don't denigrate people for fun, right? It's very serious when you call someone a liar or a scumbag or something. That's a very serious attack, right? And it's only done when it's absolutely unequivocally appropriate, which is literally anything to do with the nuclear industry, unfortunately. There's such scumbags, you can barely keep up with it. Well, you can't. That's the problem, isn't it? There's so many of them. And there's such scum. So they got a large contingency of retired nuclear energy employees that showed up for the meetings. So the pro-nuclear showed up. Chalk River National Laboratory staff were virtually all former scientists from the Atomic Energy Canada Limited, which ran the nuclear site reactor up until 3 years ago. So you got all the monsters that created the misery or in charge of the misery. How could that possibly go wrong? Officials clarify nuclear water situation. Medical literature currently offers no evidence indicating that ingesting trace amounts of tritium can cause negative health effects. So we talk about this a lot over the last 4 weeks or something. How the industry has switched the narrative from nuclear meltdowns, which is the full range of over 1,000 fission products that you need to worry about, to just tritium. So they disappeared that. And this is the official pictures, by the way, of just some of the medias, pretending they're at the fuel pool 100 feet above the wreckage of Reactor 4, the stump of Reactor 4, as we like to call it. And so what they done to the picture to your right was they built a contraption off-site, then assembled it on-site with cranes. And this is the building, and this is what they built. So right here where my finger is the top of the building. That structure you see right there, it claimed is this. But you can't get into a structure over a nuclear meltdown. Like, if you think of a smokehouse, for instance, where you smoke salmon, right, or something, beef jerky or something. So you got this little shed contraption, and you're going to fill it up with smoke, right? So imagine going in there now and living all day, every day in that shed that's smoking your salmon. Can't be done, right? You'll suffocate immediately. So imagine doing the same thing at a nuclear meltdown. They said China disposes 7 times as much nuclear waste as Japan, there's Japan again. Japan plans to release. So they're saying China releases 7 times more radiation than Fukushima reactors. So how do you have a conversation when everybody's trying to cut your throat? And I mean everybody's trying to cut your throat. Every journalist, every academic, every professor in particular, their job is to cut your throat. I know that might sound pretty bizarre to some people who are not familiar with this topic, but once you're familiar with the topic, it no longer sounds bizarre at all. And you see all these medias coming out, discharge wastewater with a higher concentrations of tritium than boiling the water reactors used by the tsunami crippled. Apparently that's just crippled. Look at that. Thank goodness it's just crippled. I thought it was destroyed. Silly me. They're so silly sometimes. So 143 trillion becquerels a year from the Zheng province discharges of the Kwangshan, China 3 nuclear plant. 143 trillion becquerels. Canada's New Brunswick reactor releases 16.4 million trillion becquerels a year legally of tritium 3H. By the way, tritium is 3H, not tritium, natural tritium. You're not worried about it. Tritium 3H, which is man-made, though, you're worried about it. And we've never seen them use the word tritium 3H in the last 2 years, I don't think, have we? The total tritium output from these 4 plants in China, which led China in the quantity of the substances released, is equivalent to 5 times the planned annual discharges from the Fukushima Daiichi. So Fukushima Daiichi, they're claiming only 2.2 grams got out, and it's only tritium, and it's in the 1,000 tanks. And they're going to release 0.06 grams a year for 40 years to get rid of the 2.2 grams that got out of the buildings that don't even exist anymore, which had 10 million pounds in each building of uranium and plutonium, and they produce all the daughters that you might hear about. And by the way, curium is the biggest byproduct of the radiated fuel rods. So the fuel pools that don't exist, the biggest byproduct of the fuel rods, the 6 reactor cores were in the 2 fuel pools at the top of each building. And so there's 12 reactor cores possibility at the top of each building, and there's 4 of them gone. And these were pure uranium plutonium. Chernobyl and Windscale in UK was graphite, and it's really bad, don't get me wrong, but it's not pure uranium, pure plutonium. So volume-wise, Chernobyl doesn't even show up on the map. And Chernobyl was brutal. Chernobyl was brutal. But it's insignificant in comparison to Fukushima. But it's not insignificant. They closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, and the United Kingdom. Right, Kevin Blanche says Fukushima is a gas. That's such an important statement. And let me show you a depiction of what that really means. There we go. Let me see the French model, because that's such a great model of the radioactive dispersal. I equate it to an invisible snowstorm, and the snow never melts, and it covers the whole planet. after a short while. This model is based on 30 days. I'm going to show you of radioactive fallout. And at 20 days, it covers the whole planet. But you can see it's still coming out of Japan, still coming out of Japan, still coming out of Japan. Covers all of South Korea, Taiwan, China immediately. Covers the whole planet. This is day 21, day 23, 24, day 26, day 28, day 29, day 30, 132. So day 32, but you can see by day 30, it basically covered the entire planet, all the land mass. And by day 25, and then by day 30, the entire planet. Now, the plume doesn't stop, right? The plume never stops. So, because the whole planet is finally covered, just because the model stops doesn't mean the radiation stopped. It'll still doing that today. That's what it looks like today. But you can't see it or hear it or feel it or taste it or touch it or pick it up or perceive it. But this is what we're dealing with. So every species is breathing it in. They're surrounded by, everything's getting full body X-rays from the gammas, the alphas, neutrons, the betas, pulsing energy at the speed of light against each other. And when it changes direction, because they don't mingle, there's this powerful pulse every second from each atom. So imagine if you had a planet covered in a snowstorm. And imagine every snowflake was pulsing energy at the speed of light of heat every second. And it's going to do that it never stops snowing, and it never stops pulsing energy every second. And when they hit each other, they change direction. That's known as an X-ray. So you got gammas, alphas, neutrons, and betas, and X-rays. And we're talking about the whole body X-rays. So in the forests and the meadows and everything else, you got all the birds and insects and mammals and animals. All the species are being pounded and sterilized in increments. And over a number of years, they stop reproducing. And that's the stage we're at now. The majority of the species have stopped reproducing or almost stopped reproducing. China disposes of 7 times as much nuclear waste as Japan plans to release. But the reality of it is, they're refusing to acknowledge that. And they know that exists. They know that's what happened. They know it doesn't look like this. That's their official story. To lull you into complacency. Don't let them lull you into complacency. Whatever you do, don't eat anything from Japan. Don't buy anything from Japan. Don't let your loved ones, don't feed your loved ones food from Japan. Bring a magnifying glass to the supermarket and study your labels. If you don't have one, buy one. Check everything in your cupboards. Don't eat the food from the nuclear wasteland, for goodness sakes. So here you got the mainstream media coming out, just vehemently forcing you to accept the propaganda. Saying no pollution was detected in the waters. The Atomic Energy Council General Wang, which is China, said in an interview ahead of Japan's release, which they've never stopped releasing, and suggest that nothing showed up in the water around China is so dishonest, is absurd. And they're pro-nuclear, right? They want to build a lot of reactors. And they can't build any if they tell the truth. And so the narrative, the only narrative you're going to see is tritium. They're not allowed to have a conversation about any other isotopes, just tritium, because that causes confusion. So they have to work together for that to work. They have to be assured that nobody's going to challenge their assertions and blow their cover. So they all have to be captured elements for the story to work. Tritium is a radioactive isotope of hydrogen. No. Tritium is the tritium we're talking about is tritium-3H, not tritium. It's got an extra molecule. And and it's very dangerous for 120 years. And if you're hemorrhaging, now, of course, you can't have a conversation about tritium because you got to talk about the actual nuclear meltdowns and the massive emissions. You can't just pretend that that didn't happen and then only talk about tritium. There is no models of tritium, by the way. In 12 years, there's not a single model of tritium anywhere. Although Taiwan is not an International Atomic Energy Agency member, this is Taiwan, delegations of Taiwanese experts visited Japan 3 times, no less, to inspect the water processing technology, to ensure the radioactivity from more than 60 types of radionuclides was removed from the water as Japan claimed. When Japan moves forward with the discharge plan in a month, the Taiwanese team would monitor the situation, keep lines of communication open. Again, this is nuts to suggest. Like Taiwan, when back in the 70s, they wanted to get the nuclear waste from Taiwan, which is an island. And so they had moved the natives out to Orchard Island, and they approached the natives and asked them, could they build a canning factory for tuna, canned salmon? And the natives were going to get a stipend each month for the rest of their life from that factory. And they were like, sure, that's great. And so they built a nuclear waste dump there and pretended it was a canning factory. And when the natives found out, they protested, no, too bad, you already signed the agreement. Yeah, but you said you were going to build a canning factory. This is a nuclear disease factory. They're totally different. No, you signed the agreement. Think about how evil you actually got to be to do something like that. It's a whole different level of evil to do something like that. To go to their island and tell them you're going to build a canning factory, and instead you build a nuclear dump. How a stomach may have caused the worst nuclear accident in American history. This is 3 Mile Island. The worst nuclear accident in American history that I know about, there's quite a few. There's Santa Susana, which is equal to 460 3 Mile Islands worth of radioactive fallout. 460 was a sodium reactor still melting down. Hanford in Washington State dumped 450 billion gallons directly into the soil. A lot of people can't visualize that, so here's a way to visualize it. Think of an aquarium 6 feet wide and 518 feet tall. But that's not it, though. And it's wrapped around the entire planet over one time, more than one time. And everything runs straight down into the Columbian River, which feeds millions of people downstream and tens of thousands of farms. It's hard to comprehend how evil, insidiously evil, the nuclear industry actually is. And to suggest that 3 Mile Island is the worst reactor accident in the United States is completely dishonest. And blame it on somebody's stomach. The one thing we noticed about the nuclear industry is there's literally no shortage of scumbags. They have this absurd diversity of degenerate scumbags to choose from. And the same thing with journalists. Nuclear disarmament campaigners to mark the 78th anniversary of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We covered both of them. We have a dedicated video on both of them this year. And Penn State, we had a lot, but they took down my other site with 24,000 YouTube subscribers when I was out looking for spiders because Fukushima wiped them out in the forests, in the trees, and the bushes. I actually had on one of the expeditions, we had this retired school teacher and their friend pull up at the river where I was camped out on. It was a salmon river. And it's a regular stopover, it turned out to be for a lot of people traversing the province on the back routes, right? And when I mentioned spiders, he said, I didn't know there were spiders in the forest. And I said, "But have a nice day," and just walked away. I couldn't believe somebody would say something like that to me. Did you know Penn State had operated a nuclear reactor in the center county for decades and hid it away? So these research reactors are pretty low megawatts. They're not like the big powerful reactors. But that doesn't mean they don't have any adverse side effects. I got a neat way to explain that to you, if I can find it. Let me see, here we go. Actually, let me just find the study I'm looking for. I'm just going to cover a bunch. Jeez, I forgot about all of these. Wow. Hang on, it's worded. If I can find it. Let's do all of them. Let's do this way. This is a quick way to get you. I'll make the point again. Remember, after Chernobyl, he closed 9,400 farms in Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. So he should have abandoned Ireland, Scotland, United Kingdom. So after Chernobyl, which was tiny compared to Fukushima, but was brutal, obviously, early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl, studies on induced abortions in Italy after Chernobyl, resuspension and redistribution of radionuclides during grassland forest fires in Chernobyl, because you can't destroy the radiation, just liberate it into the environment with forest fires. Evaluations of the cesium fallout from Chernobyl in the forest soil and the alpine lakes in France. Highly radioactive Chernobyl deposits in the Scandinavian glaciers. Highly radioactive deposits. Chernobyl's dirty legacy. Thyroid cancers in children, young adults in the north of England. They're blaming it on Chernobyl. That was actually Sellafield. But yeah, Chernobyl landed there and closed 9,400 farms. What year was that study? Sorry, maybe I made a mistake. 2001. So they had two events. All of Europe did too, because they'd done a sex ratio study on entire Europe. So they assumed everybody was poisoned. That's the reason you would do that study. Followed disposition of Monaco following Chernobyl. Thyroid cancers. Of course, they like to pretend only thyroid cancers or cancers don't have adverse side effects. There's 1,800 diseases. Followed New York. Soil plant transfers of plutonium, americium in Belarus. Impact on Western Europe. Cesiums and strontium in Syria mountains after Chernobyl. Bioaccumulation of radiation in the Baltic, marine mammals in the Baltic Sea. Resuspensions around Chernobyl. Tropospheric, stratospheric redistributions of radioactive iodine and cesium. What about the uranium, plutonium, and americium, neptunium, and strontium, and everything else? Behavior in catchment lakes and sediment systems in Crumbia, UK, which is right alongside of a nuclear meltdown, no less. Convenient way to blame that particular health issues on something else, and they did. Concentrations of radiocesium in the Italian wheat. Doses from Chernobyl action in the Nordic population via diet intakes. Environmental studies of radioactive cesium in the Greek lake fish after Chernobyl. Radioactivity of cesium, it's going to be uranium, plutonium, americium, everything else, in plant drugs. So a lot of pharmaceuticals are made from plants. Time-dependent transport of Chernobyl radioactivity between atmospheric Lynching phases in eastern Canada. Potassium fertilization of and cesium transfer from soil to grass and barley. This is where they're trying to say that if they use potassium fertilizer, then the plants wouldn't suck up radiation in Sweden. And this is how they justified poisoning everybody with food in the radioactive farms of Sweden from Chernobyl. Influences of post-Chernobyl followed on birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Freshwater contaminated lakes in Columbia, which is right alongside of Sellafield, a nuclear meltdown, which is Columbia, right? Scumbag, man. Food ingestion doses from artificial radionuclides in Columbia 10 years post-Chernobyl. So they're trying to blame the local fallout from their meltdown and their fuel processing facility at Sellafield, formerly known as Windscale, on Chernobyl. Convenient, isn't it? Radiation doses in countries in the northern hemisphere from Chernobyl. The grazing economy in North Wales in the wake of Chernobyl. The fall of Chernobyl in central Ontario, Canada. Theft of the Chernobyl data. A lot of data got disappeared conveniently. Infant mortality after Chernobyl. Australia, radioactive wasteland. Nuclear accidents, impact assessment, post-Chernobyl insight for agricultural. So Canadian agriculture was poisoned by Chernobyl is what they're suggesting. Intellectual development, mental and behavioral disorders in children from Belarus exposed in utero following the Chernobyl. Radioactivity in the milk consumed in Nigeria 10 years after Chernobyl. Chernobyl victims are not mere objects of research. But that's what they are. And so is Fukushima. Inhalation radionuclides during agricultural work in areas contaminated as a result. So they were trying to justify the workers weren't getting too much radiation working in the farmers' fields. You got any idea how sick and twisted that actually is? There's a lot of sick, fucking demented people on this planet, especially the nuclear industry. Followed radiation doses in Norway. Radiation protection in Poland after Chernobyl. Post-Chernobyl radiocesium exposure in the UK. And think about this one from a media story. I haven't got the headline there, but they were talking about movies. They were saying Chernobyl surpassed any and all terrorists in The Exorcist, The Shining, and The Human Centipede put together. What's more, it's actually real. And we still didn't get the study I was looking for. And I apologize. Now I got to look again. Hang on. This is the one I should have took. Okay, we'll get there. Might as well go through all of these. Why not? We've just done all of them. There's not that many in this one, though. It's worth it, though, so bear with me. Here we go. Influence post-Chernobyl followed in birth defects and abortion rates in Austria. Trends in the human sex odds at birth in Europe following Chernobyl. So Europe, which is, I can't remember how many countries in Europe. My God, my brain finally died on me. So all of Europe, they've done a study on male to female sex ratios being born. If there's more males than females, it meant that the whole country, the whole European Union of countries got poisoned. That's how they studied it. And the only reason they done that is because they knew everybody got poisoned. Still not the one I wanted to show you. Prenatal loss of 400 male fetuses in the Czech Republic after Chernobyl. Secondary sex ratio and trends in associated gender-specific births near nuclear facilities in France and Germany. So they assume everybody in France and Germany got radioactive, so they're studying the babies to see if there's a discrepancy. By the way, that's going to be true for the animal kingdom, right, and insects too. And the more males than females, the less babies are born. And so if you keep releasing it or to keep living in the environment, eventually they stop reproducing. Congenital abnormality registry in Belarus. Again, there's 1,800 diseases. You can't just look at just a couple. Followed from the Chernobyl overall cancer incidences in Finland, but you got to look at heart and liver and lung and respiratory and pituitary there too. Down syndrome is the study they'll do immediately after. Within a few months, they'll be studying babies for Down syndrome and autism because it'll show up. Non-thyroid cancer, because what they tried to do with Chernobyl was just the majority of the studies were just looking at thyroid cancers. And scumbag from UK, Geraldine Thomas, was in charge of the peer review studies, and she rejected endless ones. Chernobyl followed prenatal mortality in England and Wales after Chernobyl. Chromosome aberration, Norwegian reindeer. You still can't eat the reindeer in Latvia 38 years later. Assessment influences Chernobyl and birth defects, abortion rates in Austria. Estimated lifetime doses to hunters and their families in 3 most contaminated counties in Sweden after Chernobyl. Difference in effects of radiation on the abundance of animal in Fukushima, Chernobyl. And Geraldine Thomas, what a disgusting, horrifically despicable, subhuman creature that one turned out to be. Incidences of illegal abortion in Sweden after Chernobyl. Ionizing radiation, human gender proportions at birth. Legally induced abortions in Denmark after Chernobyl. Chernobyl is equal to about 1/1000th of Fukushima. Pregnancy outcome in Finland. Delayed effects of accidental radiation exposure, 15 years of follow-up after Chernobyl. Pregnancy outcome in Norway after Chernobyl. Early infant mortality in West Germany before and after Chernobyl. We're getting there. Trends in birth. Here, this is the study I was looking for all along. It's this one right here. There's literally nothing I won't do to show you the truth. Trends in the birth sex ratios in the vicinity of the men's research reactors in Germany. Done the same thing for France, by the way. So why were they doing, right, studies on the sex ratio of the entire population around a research reactor? Because everybody gets poisoned, even by the research reactors. Human sex ratio at birth and residential proximity is nuclear facility in France. France is a degenerate, an absolute despicable, degenerate nuclear industry and government. It's despicable. Population exposures of iodine released from Hanford. Well, you couldn't just release the iodine. Let's stop with this nonsense, for goodness sakes. And preterm births, infant mortalities, fetal deaths. What they done at Hanford and continue to do at Hanford, they expect to need another $700 billion in 300 years to clean up Hanford. You can't clean up what you've already done. And what you've already done is catastrophic for every species on the planet. Radioactive fallout, neural tube defects, global implications of Chernobyl, potential for disease initiated by inhaling beta-emitted nuclear particles. But you can't have beta without gammas, alphas, neutrons, and by proximity X-ray, right? Infant mortalities after Chernobyl, pregnancy outcome, Sweden. All these studies. Dental abnormality in people living in radionuclides contaminated region. There's sections of the United Kingdom where almost everybody got deformed teeth because of wind scale. And they didn't even tell the population. Abnormal retinal pigment, a major determinant for radiation-induced congenital eye defects. And you see that in bird studies a lot. Leukemia incidences after iodine-131 exposure. You can't just have an iodine-131 exposure. You're going to get the full range of isotope. We only got 5 more. Might as well do them, I guess. Effects of radiation on the reproductive system. Prenatal radiation-induced brain and cognitive impairment. Human sex ratio at birth after atmospheric weapons testing. You got any idea how ludicrous that study actually is? So they're suggesting the whole world population was severely irradiated, and that's the only reason you would do a study like that, by the way. The Rico Fermi Nuclear Generating Station. Fermi 2 nuclear power plant, which Fermi 1 melted down. That was a sodium reactor like Santa Susana, which melted down. That was the only 2 that they had out there. They both melted down. And catastrophic emissions. And the Fermi 2 is on the Great Lakes. Lake Erie. All that eventually ends up down the St. Lawrence into the Atlantic. We're right at the bottom of the St. Lawrence, by the way. And Lake Huron, Lake Michigan, Lake Erie, Lake Ontario, that's constitutes one of the biggest bodies of fresh water on the entire planet. And they got all kinds of nuclear reactors on that. Speaking of something else to constitute, does the nuclear industry's endless hatred of humans and the species worldwide constitute a death cult? We barely got any votes in the last 30, 40 minutes, eh? Just 2 votes or something for the poll. They can control the poll, we noticed, over the last 4 or 5 months. University of Michigan received $7.5 million to advance nuclear energy, not nuclear energy, but the paperwork for the small modular reactor fable. Right, and there was so much of that for the last year. We haven't really heard much of it in the last number of months because the propaganda from Japan has taken over the public relation firms people call media. Drones put into use a Sellafield site. Really, I'm shocked. That's amazing. I never dreamt ever in a billion years that they would use drones at a nuclear disease site. The problem is, if you put it into a nuclear wasteland, you can never touch the drone again. It's still better than some homeless or destitute or victim of society or immigrant that don't speak the language being tricked into going there, I suppose, right? It's so radioactive, a Sellafield, they can't even get into some of these places, so they're just going to use disposable drones. But they're not going to tell these people they're disposable. Go pick up you hire day helpers. Go pick up the drone and put it in that lead cast over right there for me. At the global footprint of nuclear fallout. Oh, it's the whole planet. The entire planet, right? Veterans, descendants of the nuclear testing are urged to apply for a British medal. Britain is going to give them a medal. We covered that last week. The veterans that are still alive, there's not many of them, just a tiny fraction of them still alive. But everybody else, for about 10 administrations, were rejected. No, you never got sick from radioactive fallout. Your children don't have deformities because of the military putting you in a nuclear wasteland. No. Editorial, it's the height of irresponsibility to stick to the failed nuclear cycle. Because nuclear power plants are about the nuclear cycle. You need the fuel to go to a cycle for so long to start producing a lot of plutonium on their own so they can they can reclaim it with the cyclotrons so they can make nuclear weapons. It's all about the fuel cycle. It's got nothing to do with power and communities. And they don't even make a profit doing that. don't make a profit either way. It's all about weapons. Anti-nuclear group condemns the Fiji Prime Minister. Rebukka's Fukushima wastewater stance. Yeah, Fiji is still going strong, claiming, well, no, the IAEA said everything is great, so stop complaining. So he's been zombified. And we see this picture a lot. This is the Donny plant, but they call it the Diachi plant. Look at that. This is the Donny 10 miles south. I think it is. International Atomic Energy Agency's report is defended by the Fiji. Obviously, he's not stupid, so he's got to be corrupt, right? Pacific Anti-Nuclear Advocacy Group and campaigners. And they don't understand, and we're seeing this worldwide, like the best way to beat the nuclear industry's narrative is to show that picture. Everybody should have a screen capture that in their email, that if they ship emails out to any of these anti-nuclear groups, ship them out the picture and ask them, well, here's another picture, I want you to ship them at the same time. And ask them, where's the fuel pool? We need one more picture to make that complete. So you take that picture, that's the fuel. You see 2 fuel pools in a reactor at the top of the building, right? Then you see all these journalists pretending they're in the fuel pool. And so if you take a screen capture of that, a screen capture of this, and a screen capture of that, and ask engineers, drop Photoshop, or not Photoshop, but print out those 3 pictures, that picture, and this picture, and ask the engineer, where's the fuel pool? Where are they stood up at the top of that building to your left? When the fuel pool is at the top of the building? Because the only way you're going to have any kind of win is if the world starts using this picture, that picture, and this picture. Because all the stories, right, anti-nuclear group condemns Fiji Prime Minister, they show you a picture that's not even Fukushima, and when Fukushima actually looks like the picture to the left, not the right. Imagine if the media showed you that picture and said, why are they faking being in the building, right? Job well done. I can retire because the world will wake up and attack the nuclear industry forever, every second, right? Think about the arrogance, the hubris of that statement. Fukushima discharge row. So pretending that there's nothing got out is what she's doing. They make a living by cutting your throat. Lo Hong Jing. Her job is to cut your throat, not to be a journalist. And Hong Kong, I can guarantee you, Hong Kong knows the building looks like that to the left, and knows the fuel pool was at the top of the building, and know that's fake, and they know that the reactors don't exist anymore. But we do this every day. Every day we come out and we challenge these lies, incredible lies from every single journalist worldwide. All the best, biggest, most well-known, most prestigious, won the most awards, they're going to come out and cut your throat. They're going to lie and lie and lie, and they're going to jeopardize the future of all species. You even got the academics, the scientists, talking about that a fish are going to suck up tritium, and refusing to acknowledge the building doesn't even exist.
I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4.
Really? That's a pretty neat trick. And then you show you these pipes and says, well, that's gonna mix the water before it enters the ocean. Look at all the scaffolding they got there. Scaffolding is only used when you're building something, right? And you take it down. Like the tanks are empty. The tanks were built to manipulate you into thinking that they got it under control, but they can't have it under control. Fukushima row, again, instead of the word discharge. Japan's top diplomat in Hong Kong accuses city officials of failing to show scientific proof behind the seafood ban. And next story, Japan demands for rice falls 10 years in a row. Japan, we just showed the story at the beginning, Japan's export of rice is increasing dramatically. They produce over 5 billion, almost 6 billion pounds of rice a year in Japan. The majority of it is in the nuclear wasteland. It can give you leukemia after 3 or 4 meals, but you might die of other diseases first. Demand in Japan for rice grown from direct human consumption is expected to fall 6.8 million tons, down 100,000 tons from 2022, dropping for the 10th consecutive year, according to the agricultural minister. Which is 6.81 million imperial pounds. It's 15 billion pounds, folks. What did I say, 5 billion? Better put another digit on that one. 15.25 billion pounds a year. 15 is 6.8 million tons of imperial, because they're metric. So did I screw that up? No, that's right. 2,200 pounds. Only Fukushima and Tochigi prefectures expect their rice acreages to rise. Only the nuclear wastelands expect to grow more rice, folks. Meanwhile, rice inventories in the private sector as of the end of June decreased by 210,000 tons from a year earlier to 1.97 million tons, reflecting a recovery in rice demands in the restaurant industry and the fast food places, and like the Quickie Marks, the 7-Eleven type shops they got there. And they label it as domestic rice. They don't say it's Fukushima prefecture rice. Here's some good news for a change. Japan unveils new measures to stop sexual assaults against minors. So it's almost impossible to get a rape conviction against Japanese people, unless it's on camera and everything else. And it's been like that forever, right? It's a nasty society, eh? It's a nasty. Japan's a terrible society. The male population in Japan are pretty despicable. It's the only place I've ever, and for years they had vending machines where they sold used schoolgirl panties. And they would give the children 500 panties. They had to put them on and put them in a Ziploc baggie. And they make a small fortune doing it, and then they were put in vending machines. So when a country does stuff like that, that becomes so normal. You got vending machines doing that. You got a failed country, right? Surfers are gone. Troubled waters of Fukushima. Iwaki City, located in the southern coast of Fukushima Prefecture. It's a 3-hour drive from Tokyo, 60 kilometers of coastlines facing the Pacific Ocean. Once a top destination for surfing in Japan. However, after the nuclear accident, they built it on a fault line where you have over 1,000 serious earthquakes a year. Doesn't sound like an accident to me. And 3,000-year legacy of tsunamis. Crowds are now gone forever, thank goodness. Even during peak tourist season, thank goodness. And news of the discharge of nuclear contaminated water in the sea has brought much anxiety. Like, how do you get that disconnected? In all honesty, really, how do you get that disconnected? Right, they're just regurgitating the mainstream media propaganda. So this structure is part of the sarcophagus for number 1 reactor. Okay, and this piece right here is the top of that piece right there. That's the first part of this structure. There's 4 parts to it. You can't see the first part, right? And so the fuel pools are at the very top of the buildings. At the very top of the buildings, there's 2 fuel pools. Each of them got decades of reactor cores. So this piece, if you took both the stump of reactor 3 and the ghost of reactor 4 and stacked them on top of each other, they're not as tall as that. And that is just the very bottom piece of this right here. And the fuel pools are at the very top of that building. And so therefore, we actually got them pretending they're in a building that doesn't even exist. And so how can that not frighten the shit out of you and motivate you to try to fight for the future of your loved ones and your children and the 8 million species that are being exterminated at an unprecedented rate since 2011? Japan's nuclear wastewater discharge plan is crimes against humanity. So pretending that don't exist and then saying what will happen, might happen, instead of what's been happening for 12 years, that frightens the shit out of me more than anything else. A crime against humanity. Over the past 2 years, the controversial dumping plan, and look behind me, they got the United Nations. You got United Nations in the picture there. We're almost through, I guess. Sellafield has become one of the UK's, United Kingdom's busiest construction hubs. It's a permanent nuclear wasteland. And Sellafield, of course, is surrounded by farms. And had a nuclear meltdown and was a reprocessing facility for over 60, almost 70 years. And a reprocessing facility, a hemorrhage radiation to the environment. La Hague reprocessing facility in France has over 500 security guards and is surrounded by farms. That's the last story. An annual budget, even though it's closed, $2.3 billion a year. The Nuclear Decommission Authority, which was started up a few years ago, has done nothing, literally nothing since they've been existed. Got 100-year cleanup work, 100 years of cleanup, safety and securely, which doesn't exist in their vocabulary. That's the journalist wrote that. The nuclear industry doesn't even know what those words mean. If you showed them 2 words, they would have to look it up on Google. So we are responsible for creating a clean and safe environment at Sellafield. At Sellafield. Over 11,000 strong workforce is joined by more than 40,000 people each year or each day to work at Sellafield. That are just absurd, isn't it? They're going to spend £500 million sterling a year for the next 10 years and beyond for construction. Andy Shaples is a project director at one of the biggest disease factories in Europe, aka Sellafield, and one of the sponsors of this year's Great Northern Conference events. They got tons of money to buy favors, don't they? They got tons of money that's supposed to resolve the issues, but instead they just buy off any dissenting voices, give them a job or give them money. And nuclear is extremely effective at exterminating all species. That's the only thing nuclear seems to be good at and excels. It actually excels in doing that. Alrighty. Let's close the poll down, I guess. Call it a night. How did we do here? Let's check the time. 11:57. Wow. Pole 2. Does the nuclear industry's endless, relentless hatred of humans and the 8 million species worldwide constitute a death cult? I see somebody accidentally voted no. That happens, I suppose. It's impossible to deny everything I showed you tonight. No, Dana, they're not death cult, Dana. Reactors didn't melt down. Dana just asked the journalists. The journalists are at Unit 4. It's right alongside of them. That's Dana photoshopped that. That's not the real pictures. The real pictures are right there. Look at them.
Where I'm standing is on top of what used to be reactor building number 4. The whole of this building was blown apart by a huge explosion.
We are here inside Reactor 4 at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant that was severely crippled during the earthquake and tsunami of 2011.
Of the decommissioning work taking place here in Reactor 4.
At the end of our tour, we were checked for radiation exposure. In 4 hours, I received the equivalent of less than a chest x-ray.
1,500 highly radioactive fuel rods inside this pool. They've got to move them outside of this reactor.
They're not in a building that don't exist. No journalist has ever called them out. No universities have came out with a descending voice worldwide. This is it. I made up that clip myself, right? If I didn't do it, it wouldn't exist. Right? If I didn't make that picture there, it doesn't exist. And to me, that's the most frightening facet of the story. Is there's nobody else saying, wait a second. I don't know, man. I remind everybody that you can donate. You really can. There's 2 links in the bottom of my description directly to donate to me. And if the world doesn't support me, what does that mean? I wish there was somebody else there that we can say, hey, look, go support this guy, but there's not. That's doing an educational program. And if you look at the big operation that I got that's falling apart because we don't have the support, we're all going to regret it in the near future. I can guarantee you the world will regret that I didn't have the support to push against this industry. We don't. The best I can do is the meager research that I'm doing, which is it's still super important. But I can do so much better. We haven't got a single foundation. You got the opposite. You got everything out there attacking you. And with this little group of people that watch these shows, bless your hearts that you exist, thank goodness. But we gotta get support. We gotta raise funds to cover the expenses. Like, we just lost half the season of research because we can't get the operation up and running. By the time I gathered up enough money to do it, now it's almost impossible. Everything we've done this year, we had to order it in and wait for the parts to show up because that was the only way we can afford to do it. And the nuclear industry is loving every second of it. I'm heartbroken. I'm doing everything I can and I'm torn apart. I'm gutted that I can't get the support that is so necessary. I mean, really, if you think somebody can do a better job than me, tell me who it is. I'll give them everything I got. The boats, the motors, the equipment, everything. And I'll support them 100%, name them that's active out there trying to educate the population. I'll work like a dog to support them all day, every day. Have a great night. Have a great couple of days. We'll see you on Sunday. Sunday we're back unless there's an event. Hugs for everybody.